Yeah, we're live. It is 7:10 in the evening. Hopefully everybody's doing well. Tonight I want to talk about tune port stuff. So tune port small block Chevys from back in the day, starting in 1985. And the Corvettes got 350s, and it was also used on the 305s, and then the Camaros eventually got 350s also. So we have L98s and LB9s, and we've talked about this before with the tune port setup. I think it's the best looking stock induction system that GM's ever produced. I think it's amazing looking. Even still today, I think it looks great. And they also, as we've talked about many times, and everybody says the same thing. Everybody, most people, they comment on this, that given its torque production nature, it should have been used for trucks. And I don't know why they didn't do that, other than possibly cost, that maybe carburation was still a better way to go. Although, honestly, I know that I've done carburation versus tune port stuff, and the tune port stuff is still better down low, but a dual plane is also pretty good. Pretty good down low. A dual plane intake manifold and a 4-barrel carburetor down at 3,000 RPM, even 2,500. It's actually pretty good. It's not quite tune port good, but it's pretty good. So maybe that's why they figured, hey, it's less expensive to do it this way, and we're just going to continue doing it this way. But what I want to talk about tonight is, we know that the tune port works well. We also, and for people that are watching it, most of the live feed guys will know this, but a tune port setup is designed to make, it's designed because of its runner length, designed to enhance torque production. It's not big on horsepower. If we look at the factory power outputs, we have 245 horsepower or so and 345 foot-pounds of torque. So it's making a lot more torque than it does horsepower, which is not unusual for OEM applications. OEM applications, unless it's a high RPM kind of 4-valve deal, but really even on those, unless it's done by Ferrari or somebody, usually these production motors are going to be, have a higher peak torque number than they do a peak horsepower number. And that's kind of inherent in the design, especially on a bigger motor, on a V8, more torque than horsepower. That just means it's making power production in a lower RPM range. So it's designed to enhance power production before the torque peak, or before the crossover point between horsepower and torque, which is 52. So even if the thing makes peak power like at 6,000, it just never gets enough time to climb past where it really did with the torque stuff. And you could rev a tune port motor out to 6,000, but it's making peak power at about 4,800 RPM. So revving it to 6,000 with that long runner tune port style intake manifold, just not great. And one of the ways that people crutch that, at least a little bit, is if you have a factory tune port setup, factory throttle body, factory runners, factory plenum, and factory base manifold, and you can obviously enhance it with a camshaft, because the factory camshaft was not, the factory L98 camshaft was not designed for high RPM. It was designed to enhance low speed torque production, designed to do a lot of other things, as we've talked about many times with the OEM stuff. When they design something, they design it with a whole different set of criteria. They don't design stuff unless they are deciding that they want to go run NASCAR, Pro Stock, or whatever, and they have to have something that has to have a production number on it or something to qualify for that. If they're building OEM things, normally they're building them for different reasons, or at least a big set of reasons. Not just power and torque are not the thing. It's fairly easy for engineers when they're designing things, the LS intake manifolds, for instance, or cylinder heads, or if we look at it, we go, okay, let's look at that. They could make a lot better intake manifold for an LS. Okay, they did. An LS3 is a pretty good example of that. But even with that, you could put other intake manifolds on it that make a lot more peak power. And that's the way that it is with most induction systems and most factory cylinder heads, and certainly most factory camshafts, is that they weren't trying to make the most power. We get to that stuff when we're like, oh yeah, it's just so much easier to make a better camshaft in an LS or a small block Chevy or a small block Ford or whatever. It's so easy to improve upon that. Yeah, but their design goal was not that. Their design goal was not, okay, I want to make 400 horsepower from this. Their design goal was, I need to make 225 horsepower and it needs to get good mileage, and it needs to pass emissions, and it needs to have like a zero maintenance schedule, and it needs to be cost effective, and on and on and on and on. So they have all of these boxes that they have to check off when they're doing OEM design stuff. And it's the same thing with the tune port setup. The tune port setup, when it first came out, was amazing. First of all, it's fuel injection. And so we went through the very short crossfire stage, going from carburation to, at the time, a computer controlled quadrajet carburetor on the GM stuff, into fuel injection. And then everybody thought, oh, with fuel injection now, this is going to be the end of performance as we know it, because we can't go in and reprogram it. We can't change anything. We can't put camshafts. We can't do anything. We now know, obviously, that was nonsense. And that, if anything, we ushered in the age of even higher performance with fuel injection, because as long as we can go in and give the engine the amount of fuel that we want it to have, and give it the amount of timing that we want it to have, it opens up the window for boost and opens up the door or window, depending on whether you're breaking in or not. It opens that up for all kinds of performance stuff, superchargers and different cylinder heads and camshafts and all kinds of stuff. So, but specifically talking about the tune port stuff, when they started this, obviously the design of this thing, they wanted to enhance torque production, which they did very well. And this is something that long runners do. So long runners enhance torque production at a lower engine speed. We see this from the big disparity between peak horsepower and peak torque. And a lot of people incorrectly assumed, oh, that doesn't flow enough. No, the manifold flows enough. In fact, we can even make the manifold, the runners and the lower part, and port match the upper and do all that stuff. And we can make those bigger and make them flow more. But it really doesn't change where the thing makes power. It might by a little bit, 100 or 200 RPM, but basically it's going to have that. It's going to have that power curve. It's still going to be a very low RPM because of the runner length. We've talked about this, because the reflected wave has to travel all the way up the length of the runner. In this case, he's got to do it kind of an S turn, and then got to travel all the way back. And it just doesn't have time to make that go up and back, and then add cylinder filling at any very high RPM. There just isn't time to make that track, because the longer the track, it's got to arrive there, and it only can do that at very low engine speeds. So the long runner tune port stuff, low RPM stuff. So the question now is, we know that that's the case. The question is, what kind of camshaft would we want to use on a tune port setup? Not surprisingly, we get all sorts of answers out there from various people, but I defer to Jim over at TPIS and Myron before that and all this stuff, because he did a lot of work with it, and they have lots of ideas on what they do. Comp cams, everybody has done stuff for these and tested lots and lots of different things. But the question is, like, how much camshaft should you put in these things? So what happens if I take, here's the thought process for a lot of people, because we know that this happens with centrifugal superchargers and intake manifolds and all kinds of things. So the thought process is, okay, well, if I take a tune port intake manifold induction system that's designed for low RPM, if I add a camshaft that's designed for high RPM, I can have the best of both worlds. I can get all the torque down low, and I can have more power up top, because the camshaft is a welder camshaft, while the intake manifold is carrying doing the heavy lifting down low. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. One of the other things that happens with intake design is the valve events are going to determine when this reflected wave starts. And so you can shift that. And also the camshaft is not making power in that same RPM. So what you've done is taken away from the effectiveness of the intake manifold. There's a window in there, and we see that a lot. The LS is a good example. If we take a 5.3 from the wrecking yard, the variety of different camshafts that we can put in there are dramatic. I mean, we're talking about going from 190 degrees at 50 to 235 degrees at 50. All of those will go in there with the factory long runner intake manifold. And then in our case, it's just the available piston valve clearance and the factory truck manifold or the factory cylinder heads. So they'll all work. We end up with a bigger camshaft, trading power. We get more power on the top and less power down below. And the same kind of thing happens with a tune port small block Chevy. So if we put a really big camshaft in it, then the same thing happens. The problem is that the window, this tuning window, or not tuning window, but the window of opportunity for power production with a tune port motor is much less broad than it is for an LS. We see on a factory 5.3 or even a 4.8, 5,300, 5,400, 5,500, 5,600 RPM is where the thing's making peak power. And it doesn't fall off dramatically after that. So 6,000 RPM on an LS is even on a stock one, still works fairly well. 6,000 RPM on a factory tune port stuff is way past where the thing's going to be effective. So with the tune port and the really long runner, we have a narrower window of effective RPM range. And so we need to choose our camshaft accordingly. And this is particularly the case if all of that stuff is stock. If we have a stock set of runners and a stock lower and a stock throttle body and a stock upper, and then the window gets even narrower if we go up in displacement. Like on a 305, the window's a little bigger. On a 350, the window's smaller. If you make it a 383, the window gets even smaller. Now, naturally, if you were doing that, you might tend to make a install a modified version of a factory tune port. Maybe it's going to be a big tube and ported base and a ported plenum and a bigger throttle body, and that will help. But if the runner length is the same, you still kind of have the same problem. You can make more power, but you're going to make it in the same range. If you shorten that runner by putting a Super Ram on there, or SLP, if you do Siamese runners, or a mini Ram, which would be really short, then you can definitely change that. But if we're talking about a factory long runner tune port setup, there's a fairly narrow range of effective camshafts that you can put in there. And I was going back through today and taking a look at camshafts that I've run on tune port applications, all the way down to we ran a tune port upper and lower end tubes on an L80 or a L99, the 4.3 liter, the LT1 based 4.3 liter, and I put a tune port on it because I just thought it was a better application. It's such a small motor that having the tune port on there as opposed to having the short runner LT1 manifold on there should help in torque production a lot. And it did. It was better. But we would have even more of a window on that small of a motor compared to a 305 or a 350 or a 383. But I was taking a look at all of the camshafts that I've run, and I don't want to go through all of them because there's a ton of them. But basically, we kind of have a range. So we ran camshafts from in the low to mid 190s at 50 on the intake, all the way up to, now we had a really big camshaft in the 383 that I ran where we did all the tune port testing. That's a 200, like a 242, 248 camshaft. I didn't run that because that's the cam I would have picked for testing our tune port stuff on a 383. I'd have picked a camshaft that was way smaller than that. But it wasn't my motor. It was already in there. We just borrowed the motor. And so that's the way that it came. That's not ideal. But I was looking at the stuff for the camshafts that I've chosen, that I've picked to put in these things. And so we go from low to mid 190s at 50 up to 230 degrees of duration at 50 in something that had not an aftermarket intake manifold, but the factory tune port setup. And it's interesting to see because you'll get guys that say, well, first of all, if you're picking a camshaft for a tune port setup, you want to pick a small camshaft. That shouldn't come as any big surprise, not because the camshaft would be specific to the tune port manifold, but because it would be specific to the RPM range where you're going to be running that motor, where the intake manifold is going to be working effectively. So if you've got a manifold that's 5,000 and below, there's no sense in you putting a camshaft that wants to make power at 7,500 when the intake manifold is never going to go there. So you need to pick a camshaft accordingly. Again, not specifically for a tune port intake manifold, but for the effective RPM range. And the cylinder head would have something to do with this as well. The headers that you're using, all of that stuff. But the interesting thing is when we go from, I did an interesting test comparing two different camshafts when we were trying to make, I had a 350 that we were trying to make 500 foot-pounds with. I didn't end up doing it. But we tried a couple of different camshafts, and these were just shelf camshafts. So we didn't do anything custom. We didn't make anything like that. We just picked two camshafts. I said, look, I want I want to pick camshafts that are a big enough difference where it justifies making a camshaft swap. If I go from a 218 camshaft to a 219 camshaft, that's just a waste of time. There's nothing that we're going to see there that's going to be significant at all. But if in this case, we run a 218 camshaft and then we run a 230 camshaft, we're going to see something happen there. And what we saw was interesting. So the smaller camshafts didn't make as much, in this case, we were interested in torque, didn't make as much torque, peak torque, as the bigger camshafts did. So you get to a point where you're going up in camshaft and then you're making more peak torque. And then after a while, after a certain size, you're just shifting it over. So the peak torque is about the same. You've just moved it and it's happening at a higher RPM range. You might think, oh, well, that's great then, Richard. That's exactly what I want. But the problem is when you shift that torque peak over, you lose a bunch of power down low. So now, because you've shifted it over, now you're trading power. Now you're trading torque. You're trading torque production. So you're getting rid of some of what the tune port is known for. You're getting rid of some of the low speed response in your quest for having more peak power on the top. Unfortunately, the gains that you're getting on top are not significant. So for instance, we went from a 218, 224 comp cam to a 230, 236 camshaft. And we did, with the camshaft swap, pick up 15 horsepower. But we also lost 23 foot-pounds of torque. Interestingly enough, if we look at the torque peak, they were very, very comparable. So there's our 230 cam, 218 cam. So our 218 cam made 465 and our 230 cam made 468. And the crossover for the cams was 3,800. So above 3,800, the bigger cam did better. Below that, the smaller cam did better. And we loaded this thing at 2,500. And so had we gone lower than that, the gains, the torque gains probably would have been bigger. Had we revved it beyond 5,100, the horsepower gains might have been greater with the bigger cam. But it's interesting that the crossover for the two was right near the peak torque. So we're just, like I said, we're just shifting it over a little bit. So the question is a camshaft between those two maybe the sweet spot? Again, in looking at these curves, that's why I do so much testing. That's why I test so many different camshafts. Because somebody's idea of this curve is this, oh, that's perfect. That's the one I want. And somebody's idea of this curve over here, oh, that's perfect. That's the one I want. Or one in the middle. Or how do I combine both of them? That's a little harder to do. But maybe something, if we had available piston valve clearance, maybe something with a tighter LSA, maybe something a higher lift deal. These are all, none of these were very high lift camshafts. Let's see here. Yeah, 495, 502, and a 110. So none of them are what you'd call big camshafts. You might try 1.6 rockers on instead of the 1.5s. Both of these had roller rockers on them. When we were testing them, both of them had 1 3/4 long tube headers on them when we were testing them. And so it's an interesting debate or conundrum, let's say, or debate for choosing the camshaft for a tune port motor. There's definitely a range of, hey, you shouldn't go like putting a 236 cam in this, a 236 242 or some kind of camshaft like that for a tune port motor for an otherwise stock one, probably not a good idea. Somewhere in this range is going to work really well. Now you need to adjust going on. So what do you guys think? Let's see here. This is going to be our poll. Now, it's important to note that all of these camshafts that I tested, these were all dual pattern cams. They all had 8 to 10 degrees more, 7 to 10 degrees more exhaust than intake. My question is, we know for a fact that a single pattern cam makes more low speed, usually makes more low speed power than a dual pattern does. A dual pattern tends to stretch power production out higher in the RPM range. We'll say usually. Would a single pattern cam be a better choice for a tune port? So let's see what you guys have to say. Eric, Jared, Cliff, what's going on? Gears and Guns, what about an LT1 second gen? Yeah, I've run lots of those, and I have videos up on that as well. Blue Collar, years ago, I ran a Comp XE218224 on my tune port. It ran well for what it was. That's one of the ones that I tested, Blue Collar. That's exactly the camshaft that I ran. Ever going to boost a TPI motor? Just curious if it's even unable for it. That video is already up. We ran a turbo on a tune port motor. I made my own little Callaway, except it's not a twin turbo. It was a single, because I don't have Callaway Corvette money. But yeah, we did a single turbo on a tune port motor. The guys from HP Performance had done a bunch of kits like that, and so I tested one of them, and we ran it on our tune port motor, and it did exactly what it did NA. Where it had the same kind of curve as long as we had the fixed amount of boost. It made a ton of torque like it did NA. It made it even more with boost, and then fell off at the top like it's supposed to. Because we know that a boosted power curve, if the boost is consistent, it's just the NA power curve. It's just elevated way up by how much ever boost you're running. Any experience with Pulsar brand turbos? I've never tried them that I can remember. I got years ago used an old AG268 cam, 218, 218. It did pretty good. I would think. I actually think that, particularly here's where I might be thinking about a single pattern cam on a tune port motor. On a tune port motor, first of all, because it's such a low RPM thing, I might be thinking single pattern. And as I went up in displacement, no, that's not right. Yeah, no, not displacement. as I went up in duration, I knew it started with a D. If I went up in duration, like if I was wanting to try this 230 cam, if I did the 230 cam, I might make it a 230 230, or not a 230. This one was a 230 236. But if as I went up higher in duration, I would be more inclined to make that a single pattern camshaft. On a shorter duration camshaft, like these 197s and the 207s that we ran, I think I would be leaning more toward a dual pattern cam with those. But this is one area where I would want to try. We had 110 LSA camshafts because that's what the comp stuff was back in the day that we were testing. But this might be an area where I would think about, hey, let's try to tighten up the LSA if we have the available piston and valve clearance, and let's kind of see what happens. Richard, off topic, but recently I had a vendor tell me my 8-degree split with AFR heads is going to blow all the power out the tailpipes. Yep. It hasn't in the hundreds of tests that we've run on those. Airflow heads work really, really good. I was thinking I Cam's XFI. Crossfire was terrible. Got offered a vert dirt cheap. I could figure out what's wrong with it. I told him I just put a carb on it. Changed his mind and did it himself. I have a Crossfire setup, so we're going to be running that pretty soon. Richard, I saw you on the latest Hemmings. Yeah, that was with Evan, and I like Evan. He's like the real deal. He's good people. And he's running that 4.8 when I was there at West Tech. So if you guys haven't seen it, go watch Evan's video on the 4.8 that he did. They put some ported heads. I think that they were Edelbrocks or something, and it was a carbureted deal. Edelbrock made larger runners and Plenum back in the 80s, made good power. Yeah, I tested those in the TPI shootout video. And that was just a story that I did from way back for the magazines. I think probably for Hot Rod or something. Hot days like today make me rethink my turbo dreams. Yeah, it was warm today. I'm that guy that's going to suggest a single pattern on a tight LSA. There you go. I think on this one that might work. It would definitely be something I would want to try. If you don't mind, can I ask a 317 head question? Yeah, on the question and answer, anybody is free to ask whatever they want. It doesn't have to be about that particular topic. Just every time I do a live feed, I'm going to have some sort of specific topic to talk about, at least for the first 10 or 15 minutes or whatever. In this case, it was a little bit longer than that. But you can ask whatever question you want. I'm still looking for affordable cylinder head options that are carb legal for the small block Ford. Only ones I'm aware of are the airflows. Yeah, the 165s and 185s, I think. Maybe also are the enforcers legal also? TrickFlow had some I thought that were legal too. Yeah, I don't think that Promax would have gone through emissions testing on their stuff. My son has an 08 303 comp. 1.6 rockers, L3 beehives, works well with mildly ported stock tune port intake manifold. What? Oh, 264, 274. Okay, so I'm just trying to convert that to the 50 numbers. That's going to be down where we're talking about on the 218, 224 kind of thing. Running a ZZ4 cam, ported ZZ4 heads. I'm a 91K 1500. Definitely need a stall. You need a stall on a 350 with the ZZ4 cam? Is it a 350? I have a 540 lift 230 single pattern on my tune port 406. Did you also have KD, did you also have that cam in the 355 when you were running it? With 1.6's lift is more like 512. Yeah, easy to calculate. Just divide the lift number by 1.5 and then multiply that by 1.6 and you can have the new lift. The ability to modify stock parts and tune the stock ECU, which is why the LS platform is so appealing. Yeah, that is good. Although if you look at when we were running the 5-liter Mustang and the tune port stuff, that's essentially when all the supercharger guys got into business and they were just doing, especially for smog legal things, they were just doing it with FMUs because the FMU and the boost didn't come in the emissions testing part of it. I wonder if the larger cam was helping TPI due to the TPI being long runner. The long runner is designed for low RPM and the larger cam is designed for high RPM. Tim, I thought Friday night was pizza night. Enforcer AFR heads are not carb legal. Okay. What do you think about Eric's cam challenge? I wish him luck. I think it's a good idea. I was talking to Brian Nutter from Summit the other day about this. He said, yeah, we put a cam in. I said, I'll be interested to see how people do. I still don't understand how a 229 cam makes 680 horsepower in a 408. But like I said, it will be interesting to see. It sounds like already that's the perfect cam for that motor if it makes that much power with a 229 cam. But it'll be interesting to see how all the cam guys do. It was a TPI swap 350, still tuning with EBL flash ECM. Okay. Pickup 250, 204, 480 lift, Rams horns, work great on 9-to-1 350. What is the JM? I don't know what the 480 lift. I got that. Is it a 204 duration? What's the 250 number that you have? Saturday night's pizza night. Okay. For us, it's usually Friday because the boys want to have Friday night pizza. I missed your test, but have you tested a turbo on a Cleveland? Not a turbo on a Cleveland. We ran a blower on a Cleveland, a Vortec, or that one was a Paxton, I think. Will a Milcam 6.0 that is prepped for boost have a harder time passing smog versus a stock gap? I don't know about the emissions testing part of it. Shadow ops. You don't like losing the 23 foot-pounds? Yeah, and this is a situation where it's kind of happening. it's basically happening, at least where we tested it, it's happening at right in the middle of the curve. So it's always that's the hardest decision. Like if the crossover point is at 2,500, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to take all the power beyond that. That makes way more sense. Or if the crossover happens at 6,500, you're like, oh, I'm taking all the power that's down below that. It makes the decision a lot easier. But when it's right in the middle, you have to go, oh, okay, now I have some thinking to do. Why did Edelbrock stop making the LS3 cross ram dual throttle body intake manifold? Did they stop making it? I would think their decision is usually expense versus sales. You know, if it's an expensive manifold to make and lots of people are not buying it, then there would be no reason for them to continue with something that's not, sustainable. I might be getting a food delivery cargo bike to convert into ultimate beach bike for me. Nice. That'll be cool. Will you even do any GM TBI tests? Third gen crowd would dig it. I do want to do some TBI stuff. I would really like to do that. I tried doing it way back and we were not successful and I just abandoned it. But I would like to do more TBI stuff. Sorry, I'm late. I got sucked into a Boosted Boys video to put the MR2 on methanol. I would have thought that they would be running that on methanol anyway with the power levels that they're at. Oh, 250 at 6,000. Okay, 240 at 50. Okay. Howard's roller now. The 406 is full roller, so the 406 I just put in the Impala. Nice. For me, having an extended cab truck, torque is needed for sure. For me, if I'm looking at this tune port curve, the bigger camshaft doesn't give me enough for what it's taking away. So I would pick, particularly if this motor was going in a truck, I would pick the smaller camshaft. AT 1490 at the tires. Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, they know how to make power. There's no doubt about it. That's what's 40 pounds of boost or something. On the 317 video, I think all the examples were with the same short block. If you were to have custom pistons made that optimize the compression with the 317 flow, then be beneficial. In the comparison test between the cylinder heads, both the cylinder heads were stock. So that's what we wanted to test. We wanted to compare a stock head versus a stock head and then see. And that's what we did with all the heads. We did a 706, a 241, 317, and a 799. And we ran them all stock. And then we ran them again on the 6-liter. We did that first on a 5.3, and then we did it on a 6-liter. And then I did the 317 versus a 706 on a turbo motor. And then the last video was actually not about what you're talking about. It was about a comment that a guy made that if we ran enough boost, essentially, that the 317 is going to, even though it has a deficit of compression, its extra flow will catch and pass the 706 head, despite the fact that the 706 head makes more NA power and had made more power at every given boost level that we tested it at. He said eventually, or his comment was that eventually the higher flowing head will pass that. The 317 head has a couple of problems. It has a deficit in compression. It also has a bad chamber design. It also has, compared to the 706 head, it has a bigger valve, a bigger port. And so I don't know if you change the piston design, you're going to have to go to, well, maybe you could run as long as you didn't have to run a dome piston, the compression would help. But I don't know that it's enough. I mean, judging by the amount of power that we lost or the power difference between those two heads, I don't think it's just compression, quite honestly. Otherwise, the 706 head wouldn't make more power than the 799 head. Okay. Come on, camera. I want comp cams 206, retrofit cam my 351. I'm fine to do everything right. Cheaper to swap a 6-liter. It is no brakes. Come on. Come on. You got this. You got this. $317 Mafia is always watching. I know they do. And the $7.99 is the same thing. There's got to be some sort of magic to this. Maybe I just need to be closer, right? There we go. Close to 60 pounds of boost. Yeah, that's their stuff. There was a lull in production and now it's back up. Summit Racing has it shipping 1 week after order for the Edelbrock Cross Ram. Okay, so it is still available. Good. With a 228 cam, I make 608 horsepower at my 416, but it's a dry sump. Yeah, the cam that we ran on the 408 that made, it wasn't a carbureted one, and I don't think it had nearly as much compression as he's running on that one. But it had an airflow research heads and it had a fast manifold and stuff, and it made 625, I think, but it was a lot more than 229 at 50. So TPI and boost is pretty sweet. Loads of torque down low. I'm in a nice light all-wheel drive S10. Yeah, Keith, take a look at the video and you can see. I mean, I can tell you what the torque stuff was. It was way over 600 foot-pounds. Small block Chevy, turbo L98. Yeah, it made over 600 foot-pounds, 620 foot-pounds. And peak horsepower was 500. So 500 and 600. And that was 8.6 pounds. Just watch 600 plus and around 500 horsepower with a cam. Yep. Off subject, I just acquired a 49 Cadillac flower truck. I built into a shop truck. Nice. Hot Wheels made one in the early 2000s. Looking forward to that build. That would be cool. The guy that holds the 4-cylinder record was at the dyno session and was giving tips and tricks about methanol tuning. I would imagine it's... I watched Mahovitz do a little bit of that methanol stuff on a Haltech. No, Haltech. A Motec. On a... I think that this one was a big Kenny Bell supercharged 5.4 or 5.8. And it was making, I want to say it was making 1,400 or 1,500 at the time. It's rare that a single pattern is objectively better, but a late intake closing could maybe help take advantage with the excessively long runner. In the testing that we've done where we keep the intake duration the same, and the dual pattern has more exhaust duration and the single pattern has the same duration, it usually enhances power down low. But for our thing, when I was doing the tune port deal, I really was looking for a peak torque number and not so much more low speed power. And we went over all the things that we thought we should change. Really easy to turn a methanol motor into a diesel. Will it really self-ignite like that? Compression ignition? I know that when Mahovitz was tuning it, we had to get the motor, which is not something that we worry about so much on gas, or even on E85. But on the methanol motor, the motor had to be hot enough. Otherwise, it didn't want to work. Turns the plugs into glow plugs. Why does it turn spark plugs into glow plugs? I thought methanol would be cooler, right? Would the cylinder pressure, I mean, since most guys are running a lot more boost and more timing, is it burning slower or something? What's causing the extra heat? How's our poll doing? Would a single pattern cam be a better choice for a TPI motor? 53% are saying no. 53 votes and 53%. Yeah, the tune port stuff, I would, like I said, there are situations where I would look at single pattern stuff. Computer controlled hydraulic rollers. 206, 210. So that's only a 4-degree split. With the extreme fuel injection, 206, 212. Where's your 110 cams at? Well, here we go. Thumper cams, 107s. Extreme energies are 110. 206, 212, 200, 206. Yeah, those are all 6 to 8 degrees. Hot air intake temps, but not if you're running an intercooler, right? Which Mahovitz had big on the twin turbo setup. He had a big air to water on it with ice water in it, and on this one, it has a under the blower. There was an air to water intercooler too. I think it's along the line of short stroke, high revving. They're running intercooler. I would think if they're running 60 pounds of boost, that you would still almost have to. That's a lot of charge temperature. I'd like to see what the discharge temperature is at 60 pounds. I would like to see what it is coming out of the turbo. I can't imagine it's I can't imagine it's very chilly. And then intercooler, always a good idea. What is the fastest? I get these trivia things. What is the fastest aquatic animal? I'm thinking blue marlin. I think that's faster than a mako shark. The Magnum series cams. Yeah, the Magnums are single pattern typically. Eric, we'll see you later. It's not very good efficiency wise. If I was running 60 pounds of boost in something, I'd make sure I had a big, gigantic, free-flowing intercooler, especially if I was trying to make nearly 1,500 horsepower at the tire. There. So, Sykes, what's your Barracuda thing about? I have an 01 LS1 Camaro, 243s, GM hot cam, factory injectors, ported throttle body, and SLP headers. 4K converter. I sold the Carmate 400 at the wheels. Do you think that combo would make that? You're not going to do that with stock injectors. No one Layden's follows. What is your favorite color? Red. I mean blue. I've never had to download. So your LS1 Camaro with 243 is a hot cam, factory injectors, ported throttle body, and SLP headers, and 4,000 stall converter, makes 400 at the tire, and it does that with a factory tune also, just the factory ECU with no tuning or programming. Limited space because the MR2. Oh yeah, that engine bay is going to be fairly tight, right? But is that a tube chassis car now? Fastest aquatic animals. My kids when I tell them to get out. And theirs is a later MR2, right? Like the MR2 turbo one, not the early one like my 86 was. The other ones are bigger, kind of almost a pro mod. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Then wouldn't the intercooler be like in the passenger seat? That's normally where they put them. Because I know it's got to come through the back wall, but you should, I would think, be able to do that. I'll tell you what, if I was trying to put 1,450 horsepower down in that car, I would want lots of cage. Water tanks in the front. Makes sense. Stop those wheelies. Stop the wheelies from happening. Dune buggy wheelies. Man, they're out of sight. I'm wrenching on my pen. So we're going to close out our poll at 52% saying no on the single pattern cam. And we're going to cut short tonight early, 2 more minutes. You're not a tune port motor. $2010. To read, I thought it was can't tell if that's a Camaro or what. You might strip the pen. I know. No, it's okay. The pen and the wrench are both metric. At one point, they had 300 pounds in the front bumper. Yeah, you'd want to keep it down. It's interesting that you'll take the extra weight to get the suspension to work correctly. So you're not looking at blue sky. It's harder to drive like that. Nice soft little woo, and then you're down and going. Tuned on a dyno before I bought it. Had some issues. It was not idling. Sent the computer to SpeedLink, and they just did a mail-in. Okay, clear up the idle issue. Cool. I think it's a 219 cam is a great cam for TPI. That seems to be, if it's a 219 at 50, that seems like it's right in that kind of sweet spot there. $500 torque ripping horsepower. And judging by the results that we got on the cams on the tune port setup, is that like we saw with the big cam, the 230 cam versus the 218 cam, that you're not really changing it that much. Certainly we changed peak torque by what, 3 foot-pounds or something. But the interesting thing is that you're not gaining. I mean, 23 foot-pounds down low, down at 2,500 or whatever. That's a sizable amount, especially given as a percentage of what we're working with. But you know, you put a camshaft in something, a big camshaft in something, you think, I'm going to pick up lots of power here. Like we put a camshaft in an LS, it could be 60, 70, 80 horsepower. It could be a lot. It's just, we're with the camshafts on the 2-port motor, especially if all the rest of the things are stock, we're just moving it around or just rocking it around a little bit. Excuse me, one more minute. I got back from taking my Z06 Tail of the Dragon. How was that, man? That's cool. After all, I went through the car, it did 1,500 miles, including some pretty quick driving in the mountains. Didn't give me any trouble. That's perfect. That's the kind of car that you want. That's ideal. I'd rather have that than have another 100 horsepower. I mean, both would be awesome. But considering what it has too much for the Dragon anyway. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for having a car that has more handling and braking than horsepower. They're fun to drive like that. That's why driving a little car like a Miata on the track is really fun. First of all, that car is very, very balanced, especially if you have something that has some suspension work done to it or tires or whatever. And then you drive that, you're like, oh yeah, this thing's a blast. And also I'm not going 200 miles an hour on the straightaway. So, you know, it's a lot more comfortable for a lot of people. But it's fun because it pitches out, it oversteers, it does kinds of stuff. Michelin PS4S is on it. Yeah, Sean, so that's a lot of power. And like I said, the handling and the braking would be very, very important. I know you have tons of videos on else with blow through carbs. I'm learning that way due to costs, etc. Or would it be better just to go EFI? I don't know. I have no experience of driving a blow through carbureted combination on the street, so I don't know how they work. I know, you know, all of the blow through EFI stuff, if it's properly tuned, just works just fine. I can't. I'm assuming that the carbureted stuff still works. Just lots of guys doing it. I just have never driven one and taken it out and driven it everywhere the way that I have with forced induction stuff that has electronic fuel injection on it. All I can do is tell you that, hey, we've run it on the dyno and it made good power, but I can't give you real world driving experience with it. I have an 85 Corvette with a 383 Lingenfelter engine in it. What would you recommend if I want to change from the factory computer? Do you need to? I mean, is it already working really well? Because if the computer that you have is giving you the timing that you need and the airfield that you need, you're not going to gain anything in terms of peak power. You might gain from other things with that early computer isn't going to have. Like you could get rid of the mass air meter if it has a mass air meter in 85. It should, I think. And so you could run it as a speed density deal, stop the mass air from being a restriction, maybe, if you want to do that. Good evening and love the page. Sure appreciate all the videos and all the time. Happy to help. Here. Excuse me. My attack dogs, my attack puppies. You're here just in time for me to leave. It works, but I like more tunability. It will definitely give you that. The Holley, the Haltech stuff. I had used the Fast way back. We haven't used that very much anymore. The MS3 Pro stuff seems to work really good. Yeah, attack Goldens. Yeah, the only thing they attack is each other. One of them, Brady, the more timid of the two, he doesn't even want to wrestle with me. And when he wrestles with Milo, he just runs up and lays down in front of Milo. And then Milo gets him. And he just lets him do that. But he does attack his brother though, which is good. And then they wrestle with each other. It's awesome. It's awesome having puppies. And now they're more than a year old, so they're not little tiny puppies. They're, you know, the Holly stuff that I run is HP or Dominator. We've also run Terminator stuff, which is about the same. And all of those, I mean, certainly for what I'm doing, it's more than enough. But they have a lot of features that I don't know if you're trying to control your transmission or any of that, or if it's a manual trans. That would certainly be consideration if you're trying to also control the transmission. On that note, though, it is time to go, but I will see you guys all tomorrow.